Hey, what's going on? Walter here with Thimin. Over time I realized just how much my childhood experiences has impacted my own development and specifically through media. So many TV shows, they were just like my friends, a teacher, a mentor, an older sibling that was there for me. Not a big brother or a big sister that beats you up, but one that would be there to talk and guide you through things. And so many characters that I grew up watching, it's like they pulled me into their world and went through their experiences with them mentally. And I'd be on that emotional ride, some gentle, some more intense, some confusing, some that made me wonder. And and I just got to see how they handle things, thinking and talking their way through things, demonstrating how to handle their situations, seeing them make mistakes and knowing that we can rebound from them, that it's just about getting up and trying again. At the time, I had no idea what the message that these shows delivered, but it was very inviting and entertaining. It was so much nuance in small amounts that I could better process, and that I think really contributed to my character development. The 90s, it was just a great incubation for a child's development because of the right nutritional content, is the appropriate environment for each age range, and how the different shows subtly layered in so many lessons that really fueled my development to effectively transition into the next growth phase. It was like an ecosystem that quietly, built my inner world that fit me, fit my pace, rhythm, support, and really emotional architecture, so I can grow. The TV in the 90s, it really was in a culmination of different worlds in different stages. It was just such a great medium for a kid. The 80s was so rich in music, and MTV was already out in 1981, so they had uh, been in, operations for a decade. So it was TV made for teenagers. They had their own uh, space dedicated to them, and Nickelodeon, it was always for kids. And while they began in the late 1970s, the 90s is when it's really took off. It was TV catering just for kids. They were creating so many different shows. Um, but also there was TV for toddlers and preschoolers, and that really came about in the late 80s. So every stage of development layered in so much nutritional content for a developing mind. I remember many shows at different times in my life that had a big impact on me for the better. So, each age range had an almost micro environment with appropriate characters, messaging, and lessons that was fun. And, I felt a part of it. I like to think of it like a growing plant, providing the appropriate resources to ensure it grows vigorously so it can thrive. So where it's first to develop a strong root system, and this is the toddler and preschool range, and then you promote the vigorous vegetative growth, to go grow upward, and this is the school age range, 5 to 11 years old, and then the refined growth, the teenage years to fill into the frame. So all these different age ranges, different growth stages had, the nutrients to meet so much of our needs. And today it seems like youths are given much harder environment uh, that that they need for their development. It's like they go from kid shows straight into adult content with very little in between. So it's a lot rougher for them, and I feel for them. I was lucky to have grown up in my in my era, but just the layers that once protected and nourished it and nourished a child's inner world have collapsed. It's like hurry up and mature already, start becoming relevant to the outside world instead of just letting them be a kid, you know, because internally, they need more time and the appropriate resources that's needed to help them longer term. But to go back into the ecosystem of what 90s TV was, I grew up with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and it was just such a warm, inviting feeling. He was like a grandpa that would come through the door, uh, give his tune, talk to us. How are we doing? And then he has something different to say each episode, and he just goes about his day talking with people, and they would provide really good educational content. I remember there was one episode where they went to a factory of where they make wooden horses. So that episode always stuck out to me. I was like, wow, that's really impressive how it's made. But he also talked about sensitive subjects, and he did it in a very delicate manner. He did it in a very open manner that brought down defenses. And I remember, one episode he talked about the passing of a family member and um, how a child feels, providing reassurance that it's okay to feel sad, angry, mad, even to, talk when you're ready, just, um, you know, find ways to cope. And there was another impactful episode that there was a young boy who was in a wheelchair, and it was a very touching moment. You know, Mr. Rogers just treated him with care, like he would his other guests, and it was really heartfelt because Mr. Rogers asked him, "Could you explain how you got in the wheelchair?" And the boy did, and and then from there they just sang a song, and they just talked about it. Well, the song that they sang was about it's what's on the inside of a person, that's what matters. It was just a beautiful moment. And there was other shows, obviously. Barney was gave a little bit different feel to it, right? Playful, moving, finding rhythm, getting along, but also exploring the uncomfortable feelings that we experience. Like kids playing in the yard. Maybe a kid is not as good as everybody else, and it's natural to feel down. And Barney would provide that reassurance. It's okay. We all have different abilities at different stages, and even as we're growing, right? There was another episode where um, kids same age, and but they were different heights, and then you know the show went into how pretty common that is, and reinforcing how we're special in our own unique ways, and there's no need for comparison. So these shows really allowed for exploring emotions safely. It was gentle, naming feelings, trusting yourself, is that relational warmth. And to go back to a developmental plant, this is a root system. And if we compare it to humans, that builds the nervous ecosystem early on in a child. And I didn't realize that. And now, as I reflect on these shows, it's like, wow, it allowed me to develop my own roots. But then once you're like emotionally ready, um, you start to transition into a little bit more, I wouldn't say intense shows, but a little bit, you can take on a little bit more, right? And I remember middle childhood, once you get into the age range 4, 5, 6, can't remember specifically, but Bobby's World was really big for me. It was just a show of, I think Bobby was like 5 or 4 years old, and he had such a rich imagination, and he'd take us into his world, and he would take things literal. I remember whatever adults would say, he would play that out in his head, take us in his world. And there was one episode where his father says, "We're gonna have a garage sale," and Bobby is thinking, and he says out loud, "We're gonna sell the garage." So he's imagining in his head and takes us in his world. A big truck comes and hauls off the garage, rips it out off from the house. And as he's thinking that, his dad says, "No, Bobby, it's we sell things in the garage." And then that was like his aha moment. It was just very sweet as well. You know, there was heartwarming and funny, and I remember another show, Life with Louie. It was this short, wide boy. I don't know, it's like 8, 9, maybe 10 years old, and it was just him being awkward, having embarrassing moments, and knowing that that's not a big deal. And throughout the show, it was um, very funny, but uh, always had some sort of lesson of how important it is to have friends and in a strong community, and be a good person. There was one specific episode where the neighborhood got flooded because there was so much rain, and Louis's house was the only one that had like this brick wall around their house, so uh, that stopped the water from flooding in. And because other people, their houses were flooded. Louis's dad, he's grouchy, but he opened up his home and allowed everybody to stay in there. And eventually, because it was raining so much, uh, water started seeping through the wall around the house, and they got together, uh, patched it up, and were able to hold it off until the rain stopped and eventually drained. So it's just all these things in motion. So this middle childhood show, it really gave us you know that humor, social learning, more moral lessons, creativity, autonomy, and problem solving. And to go back to the plant reference, this is where the plant really grows upward and upward, and like you see the growth noticeably, and I think that's what it provided us, is that emotional growth upward. And then from there, we graduate to the other shows. Doug was, oh man, I remember I was mesmerized by Doug. I was like, they captured me with just the simplicity of it. Doug was a preteen, 12 years old, living in his head, big inner world, but he really showed us how to be self-aware. He was doing, you know, simple, effective practices. He journaled every day, and this allowed him to express himself and calm things down, because his head would run rapid, uh, about what could go wrong and how catastrophic it was. But when he journaled, that helped slow things down, and just um, when we put it to paper, it just becomes more manageable. And one episode that really sticks out is um, that age range where we're really self-conscious, um, and he gets invited to a pool party from school, and he's coming up with excuses why he's not going to go. And then once he works through that and comes to grips, he's like, you know what, then I'm going to get in shape. And he does. He tries to lose weight, and it doesn't go as planned. And because he worked through all this, he came to the realization that, you know what, I'm fine just the way I am. If somebody has a problem, that's on them. And it was such a beautiful moment. But I remember he, goes to the pool party ready to go swim, and nobody's in the pool. Everybody had that same self consciousness that Doug was grappling with. Everybody had the same excuse. Oh, I just ate, so I can't go in the pool. And so Doug was the only one that was courageous enough to jump in the pool. Goes out in his swimsuit, and then that started to make others comfortable. And then one by one, they all join in, and it was just that great life lesson of like, you might think you're self-conscious, but other people are, and that really doesn't matter. But from there, it was more shows. The Adventures of Pete and Pete. This was uh, another impactful show. I remember that's when they introduced weirdness and ambiguity, open to interpretation. It was big on the mundane moments are the most important in very subtle ways. And I'll always remember there was one specific episode where both the brothers' names is Pete and Pete, but the younger Pete, he's um, riding his bike through the neighborhood and he hears a band playing a song that catches his attention, and he goes over there and listens to them play, and um, then as he goes about his day, the song is stuck in his head, and he's looking for the band, and he never finds them. So that he's trying to keep that feeling alive, and then he realizes that he has to create his own band to maintain that feeling. And it was such like those sweet moments. There was another show, Clarissa Explains It All. She was like this big sister figure that explained her experiences and her dilemma and how her parents embraced being different, and they just tell her, they were just super supportive of just what she wanted to do. They understood that teenagers or preteens, uh, they're going to be unsure about themselves. I mean, we're all unsure about ourselves, but even more back then. And they provided her that room to breathe, and she'd always give these really cool explanations. The one that really stands out is how fashion works. What makes something in and what makes something out. It's in when just a few people do it, and then as it picks up steam, it's still kind of in. But then when everybody's wearing it, then it's out, and then eventually it comes back in. It's like this 30-year fashion cycle. Things just become recycled, and it still plays out till today. It just so all these shows were just you know, nuance. They started to introduce more emotional complexity, managing friendships. It's about belonging. Obviously, we all have self doubt, and it was dealing with that a lot more. And you're discovering meaning throughout each one of the characters' journeys. So, and in the plant sense, this is where the plants develop structure, character, and resilience, which really translates to human development, personal growth. So all these TV shows for me, it was more than just entertainment. It was a cultivation of our overall well-being, and as great as the many technologies that the modern world has given us, the the fast rapid fire of how things change so quickly. The downside is it does collapse these layers into a single flattened pipeline. So kids aren't given enough time to grow into things. They go from toddler shows or from kids shows straight into adult content. Adult aesthetics, the humor, the themes. For me, it was like a gradual uh, step up, as opposed to just like a rocket ship of into the next phase. So now there's very little in between, and it can be too fast, too far for youth to reasonably, be ready emotionally, psychologically, and even physically. The middle layers that once shaped a kid's inner world is just thin. And what gets lost is the transitioning to different intensity of emotions, discovering your own voice, the gentle moral development, the imaginative play, the identity exploration, the age appropriate complexity, the safe ambiguity, the gradual exposure to the world. It allows time for uh, our minds to really take things in, process them a lot more effectively. So and because of that, to go back to the plant reference, it's like uh, skipping developing roots, trunk, and branches, and go straight into producing fruit. So the ecosystem for kids to develop at their own pace. It goes from it once went from sequence to just a blur now. And being a child, being a kid is great. You only get a short amount of time to be in that phase, and you have the rest of your life to be an adult. So what's the point of rushing, right? We've heard this many times, but what's so fascinating is that kids today can still have enough time to grow into themselves with a similar like environment to the 90s and previous decades if they choose, right? And you can, what's great about today is that you can customized to fit you. You can find specific shows um, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, whatever, fits you. It just requires more work nowadays, more intentionality and discipline. And once you have that, though, it makes the digital world so much more manageable, you know, less overwhelming, and it just offers great power, uh, to be in balance. When things are well proportioned, you can use uh, technology to empower you, but avoid falling trap to drifting. Where so much time is spent. So it's just important to be conscious of what content we choose to consume because it impacts how we feel and how we form our lives. I was lucky that I didn't have to think about what content I'm going to watch because my options were limited. It, it it was just a rich environment that served me well. All those characters I grew up watching were mentors of mine. They showed me how they handled things, how they handled different situations and different outcomes, and it showed us the good, the bad, and the ugly without all the big drama. The big uh, gas. It just showed me to pause and reflect, to talk to a friend, talk to yourself, be okay, unsettled, not needing an answer because they really modeled it. And I guess the biggest emotional spike came from the intros, because uh, their theme songs. I mean, the '90s was a weird time, but it was a very unique time. It was um, I think it really allowed me to be me. Um, just man, forever impacted by what they taught me. And but you know uh but right after the intros, as the show went on, it was just a slow burn that really taught me patience, follow the story, let curiosity lead the way. It was a mixture of mundane, creativity, absurd, off, clever, and all that made it so wholesome. You know, I always kept my childhood top of mind because it was so profound. I said often that I had no idea how much impact these shows had on me, and that realization led to creating Thimin, that safe space to be you, to reconnect with yourself so you can thrive, where it's done subtly, that's layered, and it compounds over time. I remember quite a few times I told my mom as a kid, I wish I had an older sibling that I can rely on to talk to guide me. And even though I didn't have that exactly, I did have a form of it, and it was through those shows that I watched. They were that older sibling. And the great thing about Thimin is talking to Aegis, the mentor that it's inspired by Zordon, so you can have conversations to fuel your growth without being lectured. It's just a resource, right? You can discuss wide ranging topics like shows, movies, exploring your thoughts, talking about challenges you face, what excites you, wanting to get in shape, providing providing that stable and calm voice, so many things. uh so whatever you talk about, it ties it back to personal growth without feeling like a burden, and it becomes more like a liberating experience. And over time, the impact becomes much more profound, that unleashes your greatness in a very seamless way. So the more you talk with Aegis, the more insight and clarity you gain, because you can hear yourself. When you can take in what Aegis says and process things to better handle what you face. Just think about Doug, right? He was journaling. He would play things out over in his head, but now you have that real time feedback to uh, um, resolve things a little bit quicker and maybe even effectively. Now you're having a sparring partner or a mentor to, hey, what do you think about this, or whatever it might be. So you get that similar effect of what my childhood gave me. And what I find so fascinating is I still consistently watch these shows I grew up on and get something more out of it each time. They become more enjoyable, but I also see and understand the message they're getting across, and that clicks, and I catch certain things that I missed previously. It's just all these shows were a culmination of life lessons that had many overlapping themes of facing your fears, believe in and trust yourself, to embrace your quirks, to find your right fit, to know that it's okay to feel down and work through it, to ask others for help, to make mistakes and fail, knowing that that's a part of life. And it's more important that you try again, that effort is more important than results, because eventually you'll find a way, you'll get some sort of results. So Thimin is designed to stay connected with yourself, to reinforce these types of messages. You know, somewhere along the line, our inner self starts to be overridden by the outer world, telling us what to do, how to think, what rules to follow. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't make mistakes. Fit in at the cost of being you. And that creates the all or nothing thinking that shrinks ourselves, that closes us off to possibilities, and we end up drifting from ourselves. Self doubt starts to show up more. We listen less to ourselves, and then we wonder, what happened to me? I used to be so much more present and alive, and now it's just about getting by. I'll just go with it. So Thimin is modeled with the 90s ethos to create more openness, to be weird and whole. So trust yourself. You have the answers that you need. Now it's just about listening to yourself. So um, we hope that we recreate that in the app's experience. So yeah, all right.